Hello, everyone. Welcome to our next installment of our online lectures. We'll be looking at the Byzantine Empire today, which is the surviving state of the fallen Roman Empire. The dates are somewhat debatable, but historians generally look at the Byzantine Empire as its own entity separate from the rest of Rome around the year 500 CE, and that it falls in 1453, which marks the Ottoman takeover of Constantinople. If we look at this map here, we see that the empire shrinks considerably during its time. The outline looks at the extent of territory owned when Justinian was the emperor, and then it shrinks and shrinks and shrinks. So it's consistently under attack by other growing empires and by its own mismanagement. So let's get into it. First, the establishment of the Byzantine Empire is a direct result of the political chaos during the end of the Roman Empire. So first, around the year 200, Emperor Diocletian splits the Roman Empire into two, hoping to make it more manageable. But the problem is that since the East was already far more developed and trade was happening there, all it really served to do was weaken the Western Empire. Fewer resources were devoted to it. The army wasn't quite as organized in the West, and so the East was already thriving. And then the decision by Constantine to move the capital from Rome to Constantinople furthered this trend of investing in the East and neglecting the West. Thus, when things fall apart and the Germanic tribes come in, they more easily take over the western portion, leaving the East to survive as it's more organized. And this is an image, a Byzantine mosaic of Constantine holding up his city of Constantinople. And if you do ever have the opportunity to go, I highly, highly recommend going to what is now known as Istanbul, as the Ottomans will rename it. Super beautiful, and is the connection between the European and Asian empires. So gorgeous. Go, go, go. It's the best. All right. There are multiple emperors of the Byzantine Empire, but the one I want you to know is Justinian. Justinian's important because he establishes so many of the hallmarks of the Byzantine Empire. He also makes the decision to continue the practice of Constantine of leading as a Caesaropapist. So as a reminder of what that term means, we'll break the term down. Right, so in one way he is the Caesar. So he leads over all things political and economic. But he's also the papist, right? So the term we use for the Pope today, the papal authority. So he rules over all things religious as well. As a reminder, Constantine, when converting to Christianity, gives up his divine role. So rather than give up control over religion as being divine, and now we simply put ourselves, the leaders, as the leader of the religion itself, right? So this is still an all-encompassing political role. Justinian was pretty popular amongst the people, and that's why he's able to do so much that he does. Because the story of Justinian is that he came from very humble roots, was yet another example of a farmer, of a herder, who worked his way up the military to become this, fascinating, very strong leader. And here he is shown in mosaic form. This is a very important form of art that comes out of the Byzantine Empire, very famous for their mosaics. You'll notice a lot of the warm colors. We're spending a lot of money on art right now. Also, the big eyes is a artistic choice, a common thing we see in a lot of Byzantine art. The bigger the eyes, the more important the person, or sometimes also how holy the person is. So that's one thing to note. Justinian is also interesting because of how much he incorporated his wife, Theodora, the empress, into politics. So Theodora, who's seen here with her court, wasn't simply just a wife, to have, whatever. He did use her in politics. She was his greatest ambassador. So she would often hold meetings with foreign emissaries, which is super important because the Byzantine Empire is always under attack. It's in the best location of trading between East and West. So she actually had a public role in the world. She was also really popular, again, similar to Justinian, because she is believed to have also had common upbringing. In fact, it's believed that her family were a roving group of circus performers, which would have been the lowest of the low in Byzantine society. They were just seen as kind of trash. It's believed that her dad was like a bear tamer, and her mom, was also involved in these circuses. They also don't know what role she provided. Some sources say that she was possibly a mime, right, some sort of pantomime. Others have also said that she might have been an exotic dancer, perhaps a stripper. So I don't know for sure. I like to believe that she wouldn't have been so risque and instead would have just mimed her striptease. We don't know. But her common origins made her a woman of the people, as Justinian was a man of the people. And so they were pretty well loved. Again, note like how large the eyes are, all the mosaic styles and the warm colors. Green is considered a very royal color, so we see lots of green associated with Justinian and Theodora and all the other emperors. So of the achievements of Justinian that I want you to know, one is the Justinian Code, or the Corpus Arius Civilis, seen here, which really isn't so much a brand new thing. All Justinian did was hire and train this huge group of lawyers to go through and simplify the Roman legal system, or the Roman law. So over the centuries of Roman Empire, what started off as the 12 tables became this huge legal source that became redundant or outdated. And he won't add new law to it. He will simply go through, simplify, and even out the legal system and rename it for himself the Justinian Code, which will serve as a foundation for a lot of legal practices in the West for a long period of time. Constantinople comes under attack during the fall of Rome, and through heavy taxation and labor, he will rebuild it and make it really beautiful. He will also lead a whole expedition to reconquer the former Roman Empire, which will work during his lifetime and quickly fall apart after his death. This is the extent of the reconquering that happens. So he takes over parts of North Africa, he gets into Rome, etc. They hold on to Rome itself, or kind of the boot of Italy, for a little bit longer. But as I said, this kind of falls apart soon after his death, and helps to create a lot of tension between East and West, which is a big theme of this era, right? This tension between Rome and between Constantinople that eventually leads to a big political split. One of the other great achievements that happens under Justinian is the building of the Hagia Sophia, seen here. The Hagia Sophia was really the first major church or cathedral built in the world for Christian tradition. And so this is showing just the prosperity and the organization of Justinian. And this is my photo from when I went to Turkey. If you look at this, though, not all of these parts were original to the Hagia Sophia. Originally, it was just all these domed figures. These figures were not there originally, the minarets. But the domes themselves would have been just a real kind of show-off move of the brilliant engineers and laborers that he was able to hire. To create a dome in this time period is truly an architectural feat. So it's showing that he is hiring the best people and spending a ton of money on the Hagia Sophia. These structures, these four towers, known as minarets, were added after 1453, after the Muslims came and conquered Constantinople. One of the first things they do is take, the most beautiful and esteemed structure of this Christian empire and convert it into a mosque. And they add these minarets, which becomes a standard in Muslim architecture. One of them will be colored, or there'll be something that looks different from the other minarets. And that indicates the direction of Mecca, right, which we'll go over the importance of that. Then they'll also go in and begin to paint over many of the mosaics within the Hagia Sophia. So originally within the Hagia Sophia, there's lots of imagery, right, of Christianity all within it, as seen here, an image of the Virgin Mary with baby Jesus. But if you'll note, there's lots of beautiful kind of gold mosaic happening in blues, which would have been made with indigo, which is very expensive. But here we can see some plaster, right? You can see it, no, can't see it here. We can see it again here. The Muslims would have plastered over all of this to convert it into a mosque and to hide the icons that were shown in Christianity. So that's one thing that I want you to know. But another thing I want you to know is how much the royal leaders would link themselves with their religion, truly showing that Caesaropapism. So here we see an image of Jesus with Mary, his mother, and most likely John, his brother. And so this, is a very holy image. Also, please note the Greek writing, right? The Byzantine Empire is very much a Greek empire as much as former Rome. There's a heavy reliance on Greek culture. So if we were to look at this image and then compare it with this image, we'll see some similarities. But instead of Jesus being flanked by his mother and his brother, he's being flanked by Justinian and Theodora. So they are creating this visual that says that they are also kind of the right-hand man and woman of Jesus, kind of reflecting themselves as a Virgin Mary or a John the Baptist or whatnot of Christianity. So they're linking themselves to the religion very directly within the art. So again, more Greek writing. So note that cultural connection happening there. The other thing that's kind of unfortunate is how students brought to my attention years ago how much Byzantine Jesus looks like Nicolas Cage. So now I can't not see Nicolas Cage when I look at this image. Here's me being a nerd, totally having an experience in the Hagia Sophia. I was very overwhelmed at getting to see all this stuff. Also, this was a lot clearer than I thought it would be. It was really very beautiful, and they're slowly working at getting all this plaster off. It takes a long time. This spot right here, a lot of scaffolding in the back, but I felt very privileged to stand where the Empress Theodora would have stood to watch Mass and other ceremonies. So that was her royal viewing place. And I just think she's one of the coolest ladies. So that was a nice nerdy moment that I had for myself. All right, politically, the political structure of the Byzantine Empire will take a note from the Persian and some other examples here. And it's based off of what's called the theme system. So similar to the concept of the satraps, we will take our empire and break it up into states. But rather than put a political leader at the top of that hierarchy, the theme system put generals, military generals, at the top of those hierarchies. And the way that it worked is that those generals were responsible for recruiting and maintaining their section of the military. Now, this works very well at first, but the main recruitment kind of method will eventually fail. So the way that it worked is that the generals controlled the land and land allocation, and they would exchange land for military service. So if you were poor and you wanted to gain more land for your family, you would promise a certain amount of military service, maybe some of your sons, or maybe a certain percentage of your time, and that's how they build up their military. But over time, as the themes become more populated and then they continue to split it up, there's less and less land to give. And the less land you have to give, the weaker your army is. So as other armies are going to grow around them, such as the Muslim and the Turkish armies, this will show a weakness, and eventually Byzantine will fall to these other armies. Another thing that's interesting is how Christianity will change in this time period. Almost as a rejection of how politicized Christianity became, we see St. Basil rise and start a monastic movement. Looking at how much Justinian and other emperors are controlling the religion, they want to totally get away from that and have a more simplified religious experience. And so we start to see these mystic Christians who are kind of like the Jains and other like Buddhists and Hindus as they just kind of wander about and try to find ways that they can 100% on their own devote themselves to Christianity. St. Basil gives more order to this movement by starting monasticism or opening up these monasteries. Here we can see the first kind of monastic complex where they were actually in caves. This is in central Turkey and Cappadocia, super beautiful. So each one of these would have been a home where monks could go and live and just pray and meditate all the time. So they would live together. They had to take vows of piety and poverty, and they would work together and farm for the group and cook for the group and pray together, etc. There's whole works that St. Basil did about proper breathing techniques while praying, which sounds a lot like meditation. So there is a question on how much the Silk Roads brought some of those techniques from Buddhism to Turkey to teach them that. So here's one of the living complexes. Here's another one. Here's some other images that I think are kind of cool from the insides of these monastic residences. This was a dining hall. Very dark, so this was the table, and they'd sit around there. You can see burnt marks from where there was also a hearth, which is not shown here, where they would bake bread. This is one of the churches where you can see some pretty typical Christian images. This is Archangel Michael. He's shown there, and some other saints. This I found particularly fascinating. So what we see here are some pretty unique images that show how Christianity was really, really open and accepting of all different types of people in its early phases, and it gets a little less so as time goes on. You also notice that a lot of the faces are blacked out. There's a reason for that, which we'll get to in just a little bit. So this first image right here is a Muslim migrant, and what's being documented here are various pilgrims who are seeking refuge. So there are Christian pilgrims who have accepted this Muslim pilgrim, right, showing this interfaith intersection or I don't know, comfort happening between everyone. The second figure shown here is really interesting. This is Saint Onofrius, who's actually hanging out with Saint Thomas right here, who is our saint that brought Christianity to India. And the story of Saint Onofrius is kind of wild. The story is that Onofrius originally was female and that only wanted to devote her life to God, but she was a very attractive female, and as such, men were always harassing her. So the story is that she prayed to God to either make her ugly or to make her a man, so people would leave her alone, and so she could just pray and be one with God. And God answered her prayers by making her an old man. So the face is kind of messed up, but here we can kind of see the beard, and this is essentially supposed to be breasts. Her other parts of her genitalia are always blanked out. But this is essentially kind of, a transgendered person being shown in early Christianity. So I kind of find that very interesting, very kind of telling of early Christianity. So why are the faces blacked out? Some of that has to do with invasions from other groups, but many of the earliest Byzantine Christian images were ruined during a movement called Iconoclasm. So in the 700s, Emperor Leo, as a Caesaropapist, made a decision that it was blasphemous, that it was a sin against God and the faith to show images in religious art. And it's believed that he got much of this idea from the Muslims, as we'll see, that's a big part of Muslim culture, as it's also part of Jewish culture, right, to not show God. But Christianity is all about that. And so he starts a movement, Iconoclasm, which was pretty short-lived, but the whole goal of it was to destroy the faces, destroy the imagery throughout the Christian world. So as I said, it's really short-lived, but the big thing is this angered the Catholic Christians in Rome so much because imagery is so important to conversion. If we're trying to convert people of many different languages, and we don't have some sort of linguistic bridge, the best way to teach the religion is through the imagery. And so not only are they angry that this political leader is making a religious decision, but the Pope in Rome just feels like this is hurting the expansion of the religion, right? And proselytizing or converting people is really important in Christianity. So it is seen as a threat to the faith. And ultimately, that is the straw that breaks the camel's back and leads to the Great Schism of 1054. This is one of the dates we have to know. The Great Schism of 1054 breaks what was a unified church into two main churches, the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church. Now, while iconoclasm tips the scale, this was an ongoing controversy. This was kind of bound to happen. Culturally, the Roman Catholic world, or the Western Catholic Church, was based in Latin culture and believed Latin was the holy language of Christianity. But in the East, in the Byzantine Empire, Greek was the predominant language. We have an issue of authority. The Pope claimed to be the only Christian authority, whereas in the Byzantine Empire, not only do we have the Caesaropapist, right, who is making religious decisions, but we also have an office called the Patriarch, who is ruling over religious matters in the Byzantine Empire. So we're conflicting over that. There's also issues such as other cultural expressions, such as people in the East kept a lot of Jewish practices, such as using leavened or unleavened bread at certain times of the year. The Eastern Europeans did not believe in shaving, whereas the Western Europeans did. It all sounds really silly, but it all just adds up over time. There was some, anger over Justinian's trying to conquer the Roman part of the former Roman Empire. There's also controversy over the idea of the Nicene Creed, or if if the Holy Trinity is really that important to add into Scripture. So all of these things lead to the schism, which, as I said, breaks the unified church into two, right? Into the Western Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church. So this is important because this is a change to the culture, but also this helps us to truly understand the rise of how different Western European culture is versus Eastern European culture, right? We hear so much in American history about the Iron Curtain, right, coming down and splitting. But the Iron Curtain starts way in this time period where we have our Latin-based, Catholic-based culture in the West and our Slavic, Greek, and Eastern Orthodox religious culture in the East, right? So this is truly the beginning of Eastern Europe versus Western Europe, and we'll continue to watch that develop over time. The Byzantine Empire will be attacked by multiple groups, and we'll get into more detail with much of this later, but just to introduce it now. There are multiple Turkish groups, many Turks, that will be coming into the region to assert their authority. The Seljuk Turks will be one of those groups, and we'll see that they disrupt a lot of centers of power. They'll disrupt the Byzantine, they'll also disrupt the Abbasid Empire later on. The Ottomans are ultimately responsible for taking down Constantinople and taking that whole area and absorbing it into the Ottoman Empire in 1453, another date that's very important to note. This image looks at the Byzantine attacking some of the Muslim sailors in the Mediterranean. We can see their usage of Greek fire, which is a pretty innovative weapon in which they use like petroleum to spray out of a cannon and set it on fire. So the water would catch fire and the whole boat would go up in flames, which is like pretty brutal. And if you look very closely, I think it's very fascinating how much they have demonized the Muslims here. Like this guy in particular looks like a straight devil. So we see definitely some perspective in that image. Another group that the Ottomans had a great deal of issue with were the Slavs in Bulgaria. So they fought with them a lot, such that one of the emperors, Basil II, gets the name the Bulgar Slayer. But once they kind of conquer most of Bulgaria, we see an important cultural shift, which is the spread of Eastern Orthodox Christianity to Eastern Europe. And there's two main people we are going to credit that with. That's Saints Cyril and Saint Methodius. So they go on multiple missionary expeditions to Eastern Europe, all the way up to what is kind of like Kiev and Moscow today. But in order to convert them, they come up with a new alphabet, which is the Cyrillic alphabet, which is the third largest alphabet today, or used by, whatever. So this is an image of, I actually don't know who is who, and if you note again, their faces were blacked out in the Iconoclasm movement. But here I have Cyril and Methodius. I guess Cyril is more important because we call it the Cyrillic alphabet. What they did was they took Greek letters and associated them with Slavic sounds so that they could translate the Bible and other stories for the Slavic peoples from Bulgaria up through Russia. So this is an alphabet used purely to convert people to Eastern Orthodox Christianity. There is no written language before this in this area, so this helps give them a literary tradition, helps to convert them in mass numbers, and as I said, makes this one of the most used alphabets in the world up until this point. In Russia, one of the first major converts is Prince Vladimir, of course his name is Vladimir, in Kiev, which was kind of a mini kingdom or empire at the time. And he is going to be similar to Constantine and Ashoka, etc. When Prince Vladimir converts, we start to see mass conversion to Orthodox Christianity in Russia. They change it a little bit. They take some elements out and make it more of a Russian Orthodoxy, put their own leaders in place. They listen less and less to the Byzantine leaders themselves. But we have more of a consolidated and united culture, which helps slowly for Russia to grow into a bigger political power and eventually leads us to this magnificent creature that we know and maybe love today. So we will leave it there and pick up with other things at another time.